Talk a little bit about your upbringing. I know you moved around a lot.
Yes. So I was actually born in Germany. My father was in the military for 27 years. So I was born in Germany, came back to the States, went back to Germany. So before I was able to settle down, and my parents were able to settle down a little bit. When I was in high school, I lived in Maryland and Alabama and Texas and California, and as I mentioned, Germany. And I think seeing so much of the country and seeing so much of the world at a young age definitely had an impact on me and just my perspective in terms of the country, but in terms of the people in the country and the way that we were all the same, and differences that that we had that should be highlighted and should be celebrated. So I think moving around a lot definitely had an impact on me, and in some ways led to my love of sports and also my love of entertainment. I learned very early on that the quickest way to make friends with a new school. I mean, we've all seen the shows, the sitcoms where the new kid at school gets picked on and they got to fit in. But me and my brother quickly realized very early on that if you were good in sports, that you make friends very quickly. But also, if you kind of knew what was going on from a pop culture standpoint, music, movies, television, that was also an icebreaker and a way to make friends. So in some ways, that was a defense mechanism early on that ended up, blossoming into a full love affair, if you will, with those two topics.
When did you know that you wanted to get into film, and who was your occupational inspiration?
Wow. So I remember very early on, and this happened in Germany when we went back. We went back to Germany when I was 7 years old, and we stayed for 3 years. And 7 to 10, those are key years, in the development of a young person. And so we get over there, and we found out early on that they had one American television station, and it played like TV shows from like the 60s and 70s, man. It was like old stuff. So we used to rent a lot of movies. So they'd send movies over, we rent a lot of movies. So during those 3 years, I was just watching everything that I can get my hands on. A lot of Steven Spielberg movies. Comic book movies were starting to happen. I think the first Batman came out at that time. And then right before we left, there's a movie that came out called Do the Right Thing. And I saw Do the Right Thing, and I was like, I'd never seen anything like that. And in some ways, it was shocking because the content isn't really content that you would think would be appropriate for a 9 or 10-year-old. But my parents both were like, this is important that you see. This is an important film. And I watched that and was just blown away because I'd never seen anything like that. And I was like, man, I gotta find out more about how this came to be. And who Mookie is. Come to find out that Mookie was actually the director of the film, Spike Lee. And when we're kids, they had those little books, on your favorite athletes and entertainers like Tom Cruise and Eddie Murphy and all these people, and they're like 40, 50 pages. You get them in the library, you just read about all these different people, these biographies. I got a biography on Spike Lee, and I was like, man, this is amazing. And then as I get into middle school and high school, as I watch more movies, I started to learn more about television production and film production. But then at the same time, watching a lot of sports and just wanting to know how do they do this? Like, how does this game end up on TV? And just being very inquisitive at a young age in terms of how things were made and how the things that ended up on our TVs got made. I knew that I wanted to do something in that arena very early on. I knew I wanted to do something centered around sports, but also television or film that kind of dealt with my love of sports.
I figured it'd get back to Spike. I figured they would get back to Spike at some point.
It always goes back to Spike.
Have you met Spike, Anthony?
I have not. I've met a lot of people, have not met Spike Lee.
Wow.
So Spike, if you're out there.
That's got to happen. That's got to happen
I
very
want to
soon.
meet you.
Yeah, that's got to happen. I'm surprised you haven't met him through something.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you, I know you spent some of your formative years in Alabama, going to high school in the South. What was that like, being a Black teenager down in Alabama during those years?
Well, it was very interesting. And, in some ways, I'm glad that, no, actually in many ways, I'm glad that's where I spent, and I was there from, I think, 7th grade through 12th grade. And in some ways, I'm very happy that that's where I went to high school, because that's like the heart of the civil rights movement. It's like, and that's still, in the 90s, you can still feel that those people are still, they're still in their 50s. It's not like they're senior citizens. They're still late 40s, early 50s. So that history is there, and it's everywhere, and it's all around you. So you're able to learn so much. That's just by being around these giants. I mean, the pastor of my church actually marched with Dr. King. So all of that history is just at your fingertips. So that was great to experience. It's interesting because moving out to LA, one of the first things people ask is like, man, you grew up in Alabama. What was that like? And to be honest, I had a tougher time acclimating to LA, because when I moved to LA, I found LA actually to be more segregated than Alabama was. And it was very interesting, because LA, look, I mean, for anybody that's lived in LA or been in LA for any period of time, LA is very broken up into ethnic enclaves, where you have South Central, you have East LA, you have Koreatown, you have Beverly Hills. Everybody lives in their little neighborhoods. And the way that LA is set up, unlike a city like New York or Chicago, where there's public transportation, you could be in your car, go to work, go home, and not really interact with anybody else unless you're in a sports arena. That's still one of the places where people from all cultures can come and congregate together, in a city like LA. But LA, moving to LA was a rude awakening, and there was definitely some acclimation that had to happen on my end, because I was used to being around many different people. That's also, coming from a military background, where, on a military base, military is made up of everybody. So even though I was growing up in Alabama, I was still sheltered in some ways from some of the things that people may think of when they think of the Deep South. And there were instances where you kind of, where to go and where to avoid, and there's certain cities and little towns that if you're going down for the high school football game, you might want to take the scenic route versus going, taking the direct route. But no, I mean, all